Welcome to South Asia Environment Dialogue. It's a program where we discuss a range of issues on environment and climate change, particularly pertaining to South Asia. But South Asia is part of this globe. Now this is all are connected. So the entire, whatever happening around the world is definitely impacting all the countries. It's impacting the South Asian countries as well. And in this program, we have already discussed the rivers. We discussed air pollution. The last week we discussed the U.S. election, or the Biden coming into the presidential area, how it is going to affect the overall climate policy across the world. And today we are going to discuss a very, very important thing. I think one of the most important thing in the climate negotiation across the world, that is climate finance. Will Biden bring money? Will Biden bring money here or will not? That's the big question. So we'll do that. And this program is brought to the audience by the Climate Channel. It's a television channel in Canada, and along with the Indian media channel, The Plurals. And let me introduce a fantastic panel that I have at my disposal. Let me start. I have with me Keya Chatterjee. Keya is the Executive Director of US Climate Action Network. Keya, welcome to the show. It's morning in US, I know. I have bothered you, but still, thanks for being here. I have with me Shamrat Sengupta from India. He is the Program Director, Climate Change and Renewable Energy in CSE, Center for Science and Environment, one of the biggest think tank, not only in India, but in South Asia. We have Manjeet Dhakal. Manjeet is the head of the LDC support team at Climate Analytics Nepal, and is a very important cog in the whole wheel. And also I have Mr. Abid Suleri. Abid Suleri Saab is the head of the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI, Pakistan, and also he's the member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council in Pakistan, and also co-chair of Climate Action Network South Asia. So that's the panel. I think a very good panel, and in the coming hour or so, we'll be discussing the range of issues on the climate finance across the world, but particularly in South Asia. Let me start with Keya. This election, this Biden coming to the power, apart from anything else, is being discussed at environmental and climate arena. I haven't seen it happening like this before, ever. I can only draw in other way. When Marrakesh happened, Marrakesh COP happened, and I can still remember as I reached Marrakesh, everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, but the opposite happened. And the entire political structure looked like shell-shocked. So it's the other way around. I think now everybody feeling that a lot is happening in climate change. I don't know, all this kind of expectations are real or not really, we'll be discussing. But let's start with this point, Keya, that do you think that Mr. Biden coming to White House, will he bring money on climate change table?
Well, that's a great question. Certainly when we voted here in the United States, we voted for a platform about climate justice, about racial justice, about economic justice. That's what we voted for. That is what Biden and Kamala Harris ran on. And that is what we expect to see. Of course, there's a lot that will be decided in the coming weeks. A few things I'll highlight that really relate to this question of whether Biden will bring money. One is the cabinet appointments that occur in the coming weeks. So those send a really important signal. Will give us a sense of who is going to actually be negotiating on behalf of the US. Do they have empathy and understanding about the broader political context, about the history of colonialism, about what our role in the world must be because of our responsibility and capability in the United States? We're really going to know a lot in the coming weeks as we see those cabinet appointments begin to fill in and some of those high-level political appointments. The other thing that is happening is that there is going to be a runoff for two very important seats in the US Senate. At the end of the day, the US Senate is able to allocate resources. The president is not able to allocate resources. You know, within the constructs of the US budget, there's little pots that can be moved by the president, but not big amounts of money. The
Okay.
Senate is responsible for moving big amounts of money, and the outcome of the Senate is unknown at this point because there are two runoff races in the state of Georgia in the US Southeast. So those runoff races will happen on January 5th. There's a lot of attention being paid to those races here in the United States. And what happens in those races will have a massive outcome on the way the United States will be able to present itself, no matter who is appointed to those political positions. I think it's safe to say that the tone of the US will change dramatically. We move from a somewhat autocratic, fascist who had very little empathy for anyone other than white men around the world to a very, very different kind of tone. And it was overwhelming, right? So we had more than 5 million additional votes for Biden than for Trump. It was a landslide also in the US Electoral College. That tone shift will come across immediately. Whether there's money will depend a lot on what happens in Georgia, and then subsequently what happens in the midterm elections that are coming up in 2 years, in 2020.
Okay. I'll come back to you, Kia, about this Biden talking about $2 trillion over the next 4 years, and he expects also private investment to come in $5 trillion. How realistic they are. So we'll come to that, and Senate has a very important role to play, as you said. But I think that this is a very important point. We'll come back to that. But let me go around South Asia and just to see that what their reaction are. And may I start from Abid Surerisab. Abid Surerisab, you have been part of these negotiations for a long time. You have been seeing it very closely. You are part of the Prime Minister's Council. As a country, what Pakistan expects from Biden on climate front, financially?
Well, of course, like all other saner segment of planet, Pakistan too welcomes this change, and we respect the choice of United States voters. Of course, they have chosen the best possible team to run. From Pakistan's perspective, we find it a win-win situation. When Trump decided to stop losing interest from Paris Declaration, it actually provided China a leading role, and we saw that China, which was previously getting accused of dirty growth, it actually then not only took a lead role, but also pledged to this zero emission by 2050. And the President Xi's talking of clean and green energy. We have been talking of and we have observed this war of tug between America and China on trade issues. Now one would like to see a positive competition between America and China on climate change. And one hopes that both of these countries, who are incidentally also the largest two polluters on planet, they actually contribute towards their commitments, and the developing countries and rest of the world can actually take a fresh start. So with the approach of Biden and with this election, we are quite optimistic on climate change and environmental.
So you are quite optimistic that Biden coming into the power will contribute positively to this whole issue of climate finance. So let us discuss that. But before, let me go to India. Shamrat, this issue, this investment, and also when we talk about the climate investment, we are not only talking about the public investment, we are also talking about the private investment.
Yeah.
In India, India is a different ball game compared to, say, Nepal or Bangladesh. So what do you expect Biden coming into the power in US, how it can influence India's climate position, or will support? And if do you expect any support either from the private sector, public sector, or private sector in India from US?
First, Biden coming into power, this gives a lot of sentimental boost in the multilateralism.
Okay.
That's one good indication. Now, coming down or boils it down to the finance part of it, specific, there are a lot of if and buts. Like Kia has already highlighted, the internal means the decision-making structure within the government in US, particularly the on 5th of January, there's a
Senate election.
Senate election, and the Senate will decide on the budget and the treasury outflow. So the 2 trillion which has been announced by Biden in his campaign, it is not clear it is how much internal or how much external for the multilateral or bilateral system.
Okay.
Considering that, what my personal thinking, this is addressing to his constituency, that is internal. But that will create a innovation in particularly R&D aspects on low carbon development, both on energy, transportation, but also hydrogen. That's one good aspect which is India will be looking greatly to US. So that will give some level of boost, and not considering it as a grant kind of mechanism, rather than considering it as a business kind of mechanism, that push will definitely help India in terms of one of the largest market to getting a technology transfer as a business case
Shamrat,
and adopting it in Indian environment, which will help it to grow more faster in
okay,
climate denial development.
Okay, just a quick supplementary question that India's climate action so far is mostly being on the solar. We have been instrumental in building up the international solar alliances, and we are doing big with the solar. Definitely, no doubt about that. Yeah. We can criticize the government on other aspects, but on solar, I think they've been trying a lot. So, do you think that this solar initiative of India will get boost or counter, or what exactly can be influenced by Biden coming to the picture, maybe pushing solar, because Biden has been talking about solar and the clean energy a lot. So it can go into both ways.
Yeah, it will definitely give a boost. It will be not negative.
Okay.
Indian solar sector is quite mature at this moment, but the issue is supply chain and India's own manufacturing facility. Why India will be looking to US particularly, if we talk about bilaterally, for entrepreneurship and investment in addressing the self-sufficiency on the supply chain issue in India. So there it may get a boost, and that may help not even in solar, but also the storage technology, both battery as well as on the mobility per se, the issue of hydrogen.
So basically, you feel that it will kind of support the Indian solar structure in a positive manner. Fine, yeah. We'll further discuss it, but let's go back to Kia again. Kia, you mentioned about the Senate and the uncertainty that they are, but Biden, when he did his campaign, he announced his plan for climate change. He announced, as I said before, $2 trillion over the next 4 years to escalate the use of clean energy in the transportation, electricity and building sectors. He talked about to create economic opportunities and strengthen infrastructure, and while also tackling climate change. And also he thought that it will leverage additional private sector of 5 trillion. And the kind of bottom line is the US energy sector will go carbon free by 2035. And this would allow the country to become a net zero emitter by 2050. Those are a big part of Biden's green energy or climate related, whatever he committed. So now, if Senate doesn't come on board, how it is going to affect, how much Biden, because I'm asking this, when Trump became the president and self-declared climate denial and US withdrew from the Paris, we saw that part of US went to COP and set up a parallel setup and saying we are still in. Now, this can again happen because Trump and Republican Party has got about 47-48% votes as we know as of now. So it can jolly well happen that group of Republican, they can go and counter that internationally as well. So how it kind of fan out, both domestically and internationally, especially in context of climate finance?
Yeah, so I think first to address the $2 trillion and how do we get that to actually happen. I think that the way we get that to happen is the same way that we won this election. It's done with movements. It's done with people on the ground. It's done with consequences if people don't act. So if things don't go the way we want, we don't just say, oh, that's too bad, Biden didn't do it.
Okay.
We actually go in and we sit in at people's offices and we will risk arrest to do so. We will do everything we can to continue to force action. That's how we've gotten as far as we have gotten, and that's how we will get further. It is through movement. It is through nonviolent direct action. It is through many of the things we learned from studying the Indian independence movement and the U.S. civil rights movement and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. That's how we will get that $2 trillion and more. And we are fully dedicated as a movement to do it. We anticipated this outcome. We knew that this was actually a pretty good case outcome for us. We feel good that we can continue to push, and continue to push we will. Biden himself as a figure is not really who's going to deliver this. It is the people of this country who will deliver it. And that really gets back to your question about, like, is there this divide in this country, and will Republicans also show up at COP? The answer is no. There is not a divide in this country about acting on climate change. There was a figurehead who was really opposed to it because, and I think this is important to understand, because he is driven and supported by white nationalists and oil and gas and coal billionaires. That's his constituency, not the people of this country. The people of this country will always be in support of climate action, of justice. We have polling that shows this. We have lots of data that shows that the American people want this action. We want to have, and these issues tie together. We have what we call a syndemic now, multiple pandemics at once across the world. We have the climate crisis causing large fires, floods, enormous amounts of suffering. We have COVID-19.
You can see what's happening around.
Knock-on economic effects. Like, there has to be stimulus around the world in order to recover from the economic impact. We also need, of course, to deal with the health impacts, and so we have all of these overlaying crises, and it will take an injection of money to do that. There are very few countries in the world that have the ability to inject money into the global economy the way the United States does. Right now, we don't have the political power to do that $2 trillion or to inject the amount of money that must be injected in, but we are fully committed to continuing this role of building that power. We've just started.
Okay, just a very quick supplementary question is that Joe Biden also said a very interesting thing, that when Donald Trump used to talk about climate change, the only word he could master was hoax, and I say jobs. So is it a very kind of thought about policy of linking the climate change with the economy so that a larger group, perhaps beyond the people who have voted for him, come on board? Because as you said, they could see the world changing around. There are issues of climate change around. So is it a very thought about policy of Biden linking climate change with the job and economy?
Absolutely. So from the movement perspective, we presented this as the Green New Deal. Biden said, oh, well, I need to, take all the ideas from the Green New Deal, but not call it the Green New Deal. I actually don't care what he calls it. The point is that we need a new deal. And what the New Deal was in this country was this moment after the Depression in the United States, when a lot of government money was put into the economy. And there were government jobs programs, Social Security, all these safety nets were built in a series of investments. We need that kind of investment in this country and around the world to recover from the COVID-19 related impacts. As long as we are making trillions of dollars of investments, they must be green, and they must actually reduce our vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. Okay. And so we have been marrying those issues. Joe Biden has been marrying those issues, and the entire, we also won, in Congress, we still have at this point, a significant number of seats, and people ran on these issues and connecting these issues together.
And actually, we have also hearing that even a part of Republicans are also perhaps supporting or will perhaps support the Joe Biden's climate issues in future. That's something to look forward, and I'll come to that later. But let me go back to Abid Saab. The implication, you discussed about what Pakistan expects, but overall, this Joe Biden coming into the power, because I'm asking this, in contrast to Donald Trump, everything on earth looks hunky-dory. So are we expecting too much from Mr. Biden coming to the power? I'll ask the same question to Kia later. That are we expecting too much? Because we have seen even before Donald Trump era, US was never very comfortable about money. Hillary Clinton, on that fateful night in Copenhagen, I was there, for the 17 hours meeting, she talked about billions and millions. And in fact, from 2020, 100 million was supposed to be there, but the money was not there. So even before Trump, US never came up with the finance a lot. So you really expect the post-Trump era, expecting Biden to rejoin Paris and come on board, that US will get the public finance, or you have to expect more on the public finance?
Well, of course, there must be some overzealousness and there must be some over-expectation, but there are some fundamental issues on which we know that Biden would act differently from Trump. Climate change, as we are talking, is one of them. Similarly, when it comes to this region, I can foresee that perhaps American administration would handle the Iran relation slightly differently than how Trump was dealing with it. There would be many things which perhaps would remain the same, but on these three issues, climate change internationally, Iran issue, perhaps one can see a major departure. On Afghanistan issue, perhaps both Trump administration and Joe Biden, their policy would remain consistent. So where the policy has to remain consistent.
Also, Middle East policy. A lot of people are saying Middle East policy about the fossil fuel and all that may change a bit. People are talking about that.
That may change a bit, but we also have to see that America would perhaps, in the interest of larger peace in the region, would try to pursue the policy of Trump, whereby more and more Middle Eastern states, they recognize Israel. And if in compensation for recognizing Israel, if they want to still stick to their fossil fuel, one should not be too optimistic that the era of fossil fuel would be over. I think sometime this broader peace initiative that would perhaps take precedence, and that would be a priority for the US government. So I don't see Biden administration coming up very harsh on fossil fuel. If it has to choose between getting recognized Israel for larger peace in the region vis-a-vis a fossil fuel for climate change.
So the bottom line that you are saying that Biden will be definitely better than the Trump, but may not be that what we are actually hoping for. He's not that kind of, because America's own internal policy perhaps will stop him from going that far. That's a very interesting discussion, and we'll come to that. And specifically, Kia, I'll ask Kia to respond to that later. But let me go to Manjeet first. Manjeet, this issue of finance, because we have been seeing it for years together, that in every COP, till the last day, the developed country, the developing country, the so-called underdeveloped country, there's always a talk of money, and there's no money discussion going on and on and on and on. So my question is that within this climate finance, that one is the public finance and one is the private finance. Initially, when US talked about that $100 million, we thought about it's talking about public finance. But later it kind of came up, this part of it is public finance, being actually private finance. So what's the expectation of Nepal? That, or not only Nepal, you are working with your group, what is the expectation? What the developing country, are they going to get more help of public finance, or what exactly is going to happen? or the private finance?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that's an important point. Yes, exactly. That was an expectation in Copenhagen when the short-term climate finance, the 40 million, and then the whole discussion about the 100 billion came up. Obviously, the expectation was a public finance, and it's not only it's not only the discussion about the amount of money, but also the excess. And then also the conditions that are applied when the funding are being accessed by countries, because all the countries doesn't have the same level of capacity to access funding. We have seen this in the Green Climate Fund process. We have seen this in other multilateral process as well. When the countries with different capacity has to defend each other, that obviously doesn't help. The constituency that I'm working with, the least developed country, obviously the position has been always that the major share of this funding should come from the public finance, because some of the prime needs of these countries, like adaptation, cannot be supported to that extent through the private finance. There will be less and less scope for the private finance to generate further when they fund adaptation related projects, because the adaptation related projects are not that mostly driven by the market. So I think that consideration has been perfectly clear, that the major source of funding should come from the public finance, and the commitment that the developed country has made in the climate change process. The countries cannot shy away from this, because this will be one of the key factors for many of the developing countries to come forward, is there are still countries who are whose prime responsibilities are to lift the population out of poverty, and a number of other immediate response. But having said this, fully agree in terms of the way the momentum has come up now in terms of development activities and the climate friendly development that can move ahead hand in hand. So that consideration is equally important. The other point, I think, I've just when the whole discussion was going on about the new administration in US and the finance expectation. Yes, I think this is a positive news, the way the global politics was moving ahead with few countries having a different kind of leaders being elected. I think this has certainly bring a hope, the way the slogan were said during the election. But one thing that we have to be very mindful is, it's not the finance that will solve this problem. We also want US to reduce the emission, being the second largest emitter. Just taking an example of the South Asia, our Himalayan glaciers, even we get trillions of money, we will not be able to save our glacier melting. For that, the emission has to go down, the temperature reduction has to be maintained to 1.5 degree and lower, as committed in the Paris Agreement.
And absolutely important, because also US is one of the top 2 emitters in the world. So just giving money doesn't make sense. It has to also cut down emission domestically to contribute to the overall kind of carbon cauldron in the world. So that's a very important point you made, that just the money will just not make, you just cannot buy the climate emission with money, so it has to go. So we'll be actually talking about this climate market as well. Shamrat, coming to that point, you mentioned initially about this private finance part and importance of it. I was just going through a document a few days back where few of the major financiers across the world, including I think Mahindra in India, they're talking about not investing in dirty fossil or coal or likewise. How important that is numerically, and do you really feel that without public finance, just the private finance will be able to take care of the situation? Or the Manjit just said that we need to keep on pushing that there should be public finance to start with. The public finance can only be complemented or supplemented by private finance. What's your point on that, Shamrat?
Private finance will be there and definitely required, but we cannot do without public finance.
Okay.
Particularly the point Manjit has highlighted related to the impact and adaptation issues, where there is the mechanism is not there for a private finance to participate and get anybody's return back in a assured manner. We cannot expect a private finance to be where the bottom line will be the return on a particular assurance. We cannot expect the private finance to play a part in that. But whereas on the technological development per se, where more addressing on the mitigation or the per capita emission issue for a rapidly developing economy like India or any other countries, there the private finance will definitely play a major role, because already it has been seen that a investment in coal, which is supposed to be a 50 years or more than 50 years cycle, will not going to sustain the same manner as it has been in the last century. So from a purely business perspective, a investment body will definitely look for newer technology which will have a more business life and will be able to get the return they are expecting, as well as it will have a lot of other benefit, co-benefit associated with it, which one of it is
Very important.
climate.
Sorry, Shamrat, to interrupt you.
Yeah.
When you expect the switchover to happen? You were just saying that when switchover, that this investments are not really, they are the investment the way it's been made before. It's not being, not they are now. They have to invest in solar and likewise. But when you this switch, there's a has to be a definitive switch in market. When do you expect that to happen, or where do we stand right now?
It doesn't happen in a day, but we are in the phase. The switching is happening. If you see the figure, because already the installed capacity in renewable energy capacity addition in India is more than the coal in capacity addition already this year.
So
in this
pandemic
also, if we don't consider, if we consider only allotment, because there are a lot of delay happen due to the supply chain aspects on renewable energy installation, particularly solar and wind has gone due to a structural issue on the back burner yet. We have means we are not doing fine as a country perspective on capacity addition, but still it is much more than new capacity addition on coal.
So,
and but also on the multinational organizations like ADB and World Bank, and there need to be they should not only talk about renewable, their investment should address the same. Still it is, I think, around 10% of the investment coming to the renewable sector and rest in conventional. And beside that, the technology transfer issue, technology transfer will not happen as a grant way, it will happen as a business way. When India being a major market, it will see, it will project its potential. Definitely there is a leapfrogging technological development.
I understand the point you are making, Shamrat, but the only kind of fear that I have, I'm talking about India only. If you look at India's INDC turned into NDC, it's been clearly mentioned that coal is going to be the foremost fossil fuel option for India in the coming years. That's been very clearly announced. That's the let down policy of the government of India. And I understand countries across the world are also having the same policy. So, so my point is, are we expecting too much? The way we are expecting Biden to kind of having a green thing. So that's the only kind of fear that I have, that are we expecting too much?
At the policy,
very quick response.
At the policy level, the movement is, I think at the investment level, the movement is much more quick. If you see the last coal auction, it has not got the required response from the market. There are hardly few bidders, 2-3 bidders. They have not been allocated the complete chain of which has been open for bidding. So the market has already started much more changing much more quickly than the policy aspect.
I got the point.
I also want to highlight one
Sure.
issue, which I think Kia may like to clarify. From the domestic energy policy on the US, I think fracking will be a major issue, because through that US is getting a lot of cheap gas, which is addressing its constituency of providing cheap fuel, as well as their energy security. They have last few years, they have become a energy surplus. They are a net energy export. Now they are exporting a lot of gas to India and petroleum to India. So in that, how also in the campaign, in the initially Biden has started with a message that he is against fracking. Then he said, I will be not allowing new fracking in federal land. But overall, the 10% of the activity happens in the federal land.
Okay,
Rest
I
all
think
yeah,
Kia will respond to that. But
yeah.
Kia, before you responding to what Shamrat has just raised the issue, but before that, I have a broader question for you, and I think I have touched upon it when I was talking to other guests of the show. That if we look at the history of US supporting, financially supporting the climate issues in the developing countries and the non-annexed countries, so to say, you find that from the very beginning, Kyoto onwards, and in the recent years also, even before, much before Trump, nothing actually happened on ground, and nothing much happened on ground. Hillary Clinton announced about the 100 billion, but every year the developing countries had to spend hours and hours, and throughout the night had to discuss and deliberate and dissect, and then trying to demand that amount. But we initially talked about, US itself talked about it. So with that kind of background in mind, what's your expectation? That will we go back to that situation, or it will be more positive than before? Yeah.
My expectation is that in any scenario, we will have to push as civil society on all of these range of issues. We will have to push and push hard. What we know is that in the very last days of the Obama administration, some of the very last things they did was to free up money for international climate finance. On the way out the door, they wanted to allocate as much money as they could.
Absolutely.
They knew that that was important, and they did it. We know that we are going to have to keep a very close eye on what's going on across a range of climate issues. That said, we are fully committed to stopping all extraction of fossil fuels in this country, to making sure that we have a just and equitable transition within the country so that we have people taken care of while we make that change. And I think that what we're going to see in the Biden administration is what is an enormous amount of scrutiny on the financing and the export of fossil fuels. And so banks are not going to be able to fund pipelines with no scrutiny. They are not going to be able to fund export terminals with no scrutiny. That era is over. Everything will have an enormous amount of scrutiny. And then we come in as civil society with, frankly, confrontational politics. We come in and we say, we won't stand for this. Too many people are dying. Too many people are getting hurt. We're not going to stand for this anymore, and we will continue to push and push and push until we get the future that we want. We have a lot of education to do of our own movement on the international piece of this. I think it's right that when we talk about $2 trillion, you know, we have almost 1 million people in the United States on unemployment, asking for unemployment. We have massive amounts of inequality within the United States. We have, you know, shocking amounts, frankly, of poverty within the United States. And people in the United States understand and know that. I think the extent to which the movement actually understands what's happening in the rest of the world is small. Very few people who come from, you know, everyday, you know, civil society actors can afford to come to a COP, a UN meeting. So the people from the United States you see at the UN meetings are highly privileged parts of large white-led environmental organizations. That is actually not what the movement looks like in the United States. The movement in the United States is primarily people of color, primarily people who are working class people who are fighting the coal-fired power plant that is next to their house and is giving their family cancer and asthma. That's how they came into the movement. They are fighting the pipeline that is coming through their family's farmland. That's how they came into the movement. And so we have to bring an understanding of the rest of the world. It's not going to be easy. We have to persuade people to understand what's happening in the rest of the world, but they are primed to understand it because they understand the injustice they themselves are facing. And so we need to bring that political education to the movement in the US to broaden that understanding to be a global understanding so that we as a movement can be a global movement that are fighting for each other. And that means a whole lot of climate finance.
Very interesting point that you said that the moment, the time US people start understanding the impact of climate change around them, they could identify what's happening around the world, and they can actually feel the solidarity with the rest of the world, and that may facilitate or pave the way for the US government to act in maybe more proactive manner. That's a very, very, very important and interesting point. Any thought about what Shamrat just raised the issue? Any pointer on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the era of fossil fuels is over in this country. What we saw with that back and forth on fracking in the debate was a desperation over a few voters in Pennsylvania. And so what happened is that they wanted to attract a few voters in Pennsylvania. It had a very bad effect in the US. I'm going to be honest. What happened is before Biden said, I don't support a ban on fracking, public support in Pennsylvania was against fracking. When Biden said, I don't support a ban, public support was like, oh, well, we like Biden, so I must also be supportive of fracking. But we will turn that over because the people of the country are experiencing the fact that they can't drink the water from the fracking. You know,
Okay.
like people like to drink water. What can I say? It's like water is life. Everyone wants some clean water, and the fracking is destroying that for our agricultural land.
No, that's it.
So what you see at the
absolutely.
local level is this stuff is getting blocked. You see at the national level, the financing isn't going to come through. You see that people don't want to work on it anymore. And so I just don't see a future for fossil fuels in this country. You know, the way that we are winning from a movement perspective, not to say this particular election is the reason, but from a movement perspective, we are applying so much pressure every step of the way for every pipeline, every export facility. So I just don't, we will stop it.
Okay. Very, very interesting point that Kia has made. Let me go to Abid Saab again, Abid Suleri. That see, when we talk about again coming back to the public finance and private finance, when we talk about the public finance, the main instruments like GCF or GF, how happy you are. Once Jairam Ramesh, the former Environment Minister of India, said very famously, it's neither fast not finance. So what your expectation? Are we happy the way GCF and GF are operating and supporting the country like Pakistan and Nepal or the other countries? What's your take?
Like all other developing countries, we know the funds are dry. B, many of the commitments, they are actually new labels on the previous ODI commitments. So one need to make a subtle difference between new commitments for these funds and the bilateral or multilateral aid that developed countries
Exactly.
already been announcing. So a lot needs to be done. But with the withdrawal of America from the Paris Declaration, this whole funds, be they public finance or private finance, those had lost momentum. And now one needs to perhaps wait and see to find out that what happens in the run-up to Glasgow COP, and whether there are certain new commitments. And one also need to see that how long this quote-unquote second wave of COVID keep on impacting the globe, because we also need to be mindful of the fact that with the pandemic, the world is also entering into a new recession, global recession. And in the era of recession, I am not expecting either EU or United States or any other country not to attend its own people first and put some money in the Global Climate Fund. Although I would be extremely looking forward to it, but then being pragmatic and being realistic, I don't see it happening at least in 2021.
I think that's very, very, very realistic and very pragmatic words. What's Nepal thinking about it? Do you agree with the attention of Abid Saab that the situation that we are right now in, the pandemic and the second wave, third waves, and all these are talked about. Vaccines are talked, but not really there. So under this kind of situation, is it realistic to think that even Biden winning the election in US will pump in money in the public finance? What are your expectations?
Yeah, I think thanks, Abhijit, sir. That's a pragmatic way. That's the situation where we are now. But having said that, the cost of the implementation of action in the ground, the more the actions are delayed, the more expensive they will be. The way the countries will look forward in terms of a short-term and the quick solution, the response that has to be done in the long run will be more expensive. And again, it will fall under the commitments that the countries have, the obligation that the countries have under this multilateral process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the whole debate about the building back better or the green resilience recovery, I think that it has been proven, and the recovery can go hand in hand in terms of the clean investment. Many of our countries does not have to do a same mistake that were done by the countries using the fossil fuel. So I think we also have to look for the opportunities that we have in front of us. Also considering the practical sense that we have
happening around us. So it's happening around us. So very pragmatic. Shamrat, the same question that GCF and GEF being always talked about, that they're always kind of not having adequate funds and not being supporting enough. But now with the pandemic, as being shared by the co-participants, that really the expectation on ground is that though we really will definitely encourage or think that if the fund comes, so great, but with the pandemic happening, it's unlikely. There's a recession. The world is going through another set of recession. So you feel that GCF, GEF are not really that kind of supportive at this point of time?
Yeah, going a step ahead means even when it was not pandemic, in that scenario, what we have got, 100 billion was the commitment. We hardly around 35 billion was the flow. And among that, hardly 20% has gone to the impact and adaptation related issues, which is more of a qualitative rather than quantitative. So, and how much that has gone as a grant is 1/4, rest as soft loan or at per market loan. So you are doing a business, also taking a benefit of climate banner. So I cannot more politely, I can say anything much bad.
You are quite explicit. You are quite explicit about that. Climate business with climate banner. That's very, very explicit. Kya, very quickly, your thought about what Shamrat is just saying, that are they taking advantage of climate change to make business, or really supporting it?
I mean, I think it depends who they is, obviously. I think that we are trying to do a major transformation of this country and of the world. I think there are people who are going to try to make money off of that. I think that that's okay if they are treating people well and they are taking care of of Mother Earth while they are doing so. I'm not, totally opposed to that. That said, I do think that the world has moved a little bit too far towards capitalism, towards this idea of everything is about money and making money. Sometimes it's about people. Sometimes it's about animals. Sometimes it's about trees. Sometimes it's about just protecting the things that we love on this planet.
Unfortunately, here the politicians don't feel like that. They don't think like that. That's what he was saying. This should be the way the people should look at the world. But unfortunately, politicians across the spectrum, most of them don't think like that. So that's the unfortunate part of the story.
Yeah,
and they are the decision makers. They are the decision makers.
And in the United States, we have a small group of politicians who do think this way, that we are bringing forward, who are movement leaders, who we are getting into the halls of power. And so we have, in the United States, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman, excuse me. We have so many new politicians who do think this way, who do talk about ultimately what has value. Is it this paper that is money, or is it our health and our well-being and the trees and the clean air? Absolutely. And I do think that it is nascent, but we have to bring that way of thinking into the halls of power and into even the halls of companies, because or else we won't have those things that ultimately are the things that make life good.
Okay, that's the hopeful note. But let's come to you for a very contentious issue on which the most part of Madrid COP was, I would say, wasted time. That was the market versus market. Kyoto created a carbon market, and then Paris created another set of carbon market. And the country like India, and there are a few other countries as well, which are saying that our Kyoto-related market, we have created CERs and other things. We are supposed to get money, but now the UNFCCC, this latest Paris agreement, is saying, no, the old market is gone, so you're not going to get money out of it. You have to come to the new market. So the point is that the investment that we did for the old market, we are not getting back anything. So that market versus market was a major issue in Madrid and was not sorted out. It was supposed to be sorted out it is supposed to be sorted out in Glasgow. Your take on that, what do you feel? What is the realistic way of going forward with that?
So I don't have a great answer. I mean, I think the reality is that we live in a planet where the rules keep getting changed for the people who have the least resources to deal with the rules getting changed. That predates Kyoto, that unfairness of constantly changing the rules. Because the U.S. was never a party to Kyoto, I think that the U.S. will stay out of those negotiations. But the fundamental value of fairness and doing what's right is something that we will push very hard to make sure anyone who is sitting in the seat negotiating for the U.S. is pushing for. The U.S. won't be in the Kyoto negotiations and hasn't been ever in the Kyoto negotiations, so just won't be a formal part of that conversation. So that's a harder place for us to really push as U.S. civil society. Okay.
Shamrat, this is an issue which India actually fought a lot in Madrid, that market versus market. I'm just asking you, what's your, as an independent expert, what's your take on that? Whether the CERs are being produced before Paris as part of the Kyoto should be considered in somewhere around, because government of India is saying, and other governments as well, they're saying that we have invested money on that. People have invested money. So why even process is not recognizing it? So what's your take? Very quickly, we are coming almost 5-10 minutes.
I will make 2-3 points. One, this is the first system under UN banner which was designed for and through monitoring verification mechanism. There is a quality issue. Definitely there is a quality issue, and that's the point of contention when this Paris new mechanism has been proposed.
Exactly.
Because the old mechanism, they said there is a quality issue, leakage issue, and the quality of the emission reduction is not proper. But the business sector who has participated, as well as the developing country who has participated in that system and have done some kind of investment, though if I consider some parties not done proper way. So, but we also consider there are a lot of genuine projects being developed. Also, the Paris system, what it has been proposed, it may evolve into a better system than what Kyoto was, because Kyoto was a corporation to corporation or organization to organization trading. It has now become more country involved trading system. we should think of definitely not accept those leakages and have a emission reduction unit which is not actually been happened. But we should not also penalize the investment it has gone for. So it should be cancelled. As a civil society from
Should be
India,
cancelled.
it should be cancelled with sufficient payment against those investment which has gone to create those emission reduction. So it should not be accounted for overall net zero target or anything like that.
But Shamrat, will it not be a contradiction?
No,
if we cancel it and then again paying for it, paying for the emission reduction, but then cancelling that emission reduction, whatever value is coming up, will it not be a contradiction?
It will be a contradiction, but if we require the private sector to handhold with the policymakers, with the environmentalists, with everybody to make the world emission net zero target addressed, without the corporations, without the business, we cannot do it. We have to have certain level of commitment to them also.
Okay. So you say that some middle path has to be found.
Means if we cancel it, we are doing the ideal case that we are not considering it for the absolute emission reduction calculation. But if we cancel it, the business sector will be the loser. We have to somehow compensate it.
But the payment being made, how that payment will be accounted for? If we cancel the emission reduction, the payment has no linkage with the emission reduction.
It will be addressed in the cancellation process through any kind of multilateral mechanism.
Very
climate finance.
New kind of thought Shamrat has raised. Let me very quickly take the opinion of others. Abid Suneri Saab, what's your take on that? It's a very contentious issue, I know. What's your take on that?
It's about trust building in countries like Pakistan or other countries. Of course, we spent many years trying to win private sector's confidence. Now, all of a sudden, if we get back to them and tell them that, hang on, the rules have been changed and whatever you have been doing, we were telling them about the whole benefits of investing in clean and green growth. And if they reduce their emission, these would be the benefits. Now, all of a sudden, if we tell them that because our baseline and our bar has been lifted up, so whatever you did has gone wasted. I don't think that we will be able to win their trust again. So I completely support Samarajji's position. In the Paris rule books, in the Glasgow negotiation, we have to come up with some sort of idea whereby there can be some sort of transitory arrangement. In that sort of transitory arrangement, those in developing countries, those corporate sectors who have already taken those baby steps, I think those needs to be compensated, and only then we can think of adopting a new one. I'm all for adopting the new one, but not
the old backlog has to be cleared. Old backlog has to be cleared. No, I don't understand. Is it there? Can there not be a process, an even kind of umbrella process, which looks into individually of all these projects and find out which is actually being a leakage and which is real? If that happens, then you can know that which are real and you can pay for that, the leaked one will not be paid. Is it not possible to do that?
Can I respond?
Just let Abid Saab respond to that, then come to you, and also Manjeet, I'll bring Manjeet into.
Well, of course, when we're talking of multilateral dialogues, everything is possible. It's all about having a credible evidences, having credible indicators, and then making some verification against those indicators.
Exactly.
I don't see that in the era of digital technology.
That's the most transparent way of going about it. The most transparent way of going about it. Absolutely. I think that's the way. Shamrat, you were trying to say something very quickly. I'll come to Manjeet.
The whole system of approving those projects was through an monitoring and verification route with third-party verification, with appointed designated operational entity by UN. So you cannot say that whatever they have done, or the UN on behalf of UN they have done, which ultimately UN have done, it is now the same body will say I have done wrong, so I will cancel.
Then what's
this is a leakage.
Then the leakage, what's the ground of terming them leakage? If UN body cleared it, then on the outset, how it can be accepted as a leakage?
Yes, when they have cleared it, they have accepted that financial as well as environmental additionality. They cannot technically come and say it is a leakage. So
that's absolutely that's the whole point.
So if there is a qualitative issue overall, without going into the fundamentals, they have to then compensate it and cancel it, and then go to the.
But I understand that whole allegation is qualitative.
Yes.
That whole allegation is qualitative. If you don't have any data with you, then how can you term something as leakage or something is not leakage? It's a very, very broad
multilateral system can't run on discretions, and it can't run on whimsical policies. Of course, whatever was discussed and negotiated, now the UN system and UNFCCC has to respect it, and then
absolutely.
Of course they can move on.
Absolutely. I think completely. Manjeet, your take on this?
Yeah, I think this is one of the hot discussion that we had for a couple of years.
We are feeling it right out here.
I'm sure we cannot solve this here, but I think the way we have blamed a set of countries for a long time in terms of doing business in this issue, we cannot allow another set of countries to do a business again in the same way. If you think about the community living in the foothills of Himalaya or somewhere near the landslide area, we cannot go them and tell that there are few countries who wants to take forward the units which will not do a real reduction of emission, which will help them to do a business, which will help some countries to make profit on climate change, and your life will be under the water. So I think this is a fundamental issue. The environmental integrity component is here. There must be a net emission reduction. There has to be a real emission reduction to achieve the 1.5
real emission reduction. Manjeet, what's the Nepal's position on this Kyoto versus Paris market? Do they support that old backlog need to be cleared, or they think no, you start afresh with Paris? What's the position of
Nepal, Bangladesh, a number of countries who negotiate on as a least developed country group, as a negotiating group, has a very clear position that the units cannot be transferred. Which are under preparation, which will make a reduction. So just if we just think very clearly, I think the emission that has been reduced few years earlier, if you count those emissions, there will be no emission reduction. It's okay. I think I think that has to be absolutely clear, because the Paris Agreement doesn't allow double counting the environmental integrity, the real emission reduction, as well as there is a term called OMZE, overall mitigation of global outcomes. So I think those principles has to be respected.
Okay. We have come to the almost end of this program, but let's go to the last question, and I would like to have very brief response from all of you. I'll start with Kia, because Kia raised it, that there is a group of politicians in US who are now thinking in a different manner. We also see it's happening in India, also maybe in Pakistan or Nepal or Bangladesh. Across the world, there's a new crop of politicians coming up who are more kind of circumspect, kind of feel about the issues like environment in a better way, or climate change. But sadly, the dominant politics is still being the way we know. So do you feel the pandemic that is happening, because pandemic has changed a lot of equations. We never thought ever that for 7 or 8 months, we will be struck up completely. The world will pause and stop. Fortunately, pandemic has some positive issues. That's why we are having this kind of programs. Before pandemic, we might not have thought about it, but now we are having it. But still, the pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons. Do you feel, Kia, that this actual consciousness, because I'm asking this, because investing against environment gives you an immediate illegal parallel market. And investing for environment gives you a long-term sustainable market, but it's a long-term one. Always politicians think about 5 years down. So you really feel, young or old, or whatever, Democrats or Republic, will that catch on? You expect the pandemic will change the politics in a better way so that the issues like climate finance will be taken up in a much better way? Very quick. Yeah.
Very quickly, yes. I think that it will change the way people think. And the reason I think so is because it exposed everything that was already happening that was unjust. And so all of this injustice was there, the lack of a safety net, the lack of a care for mother, but this exposed it. And so it can change it if we actually go and do the kind of education we need to do as movements.
Okay. Abid Saab, what's your take on that?
Well,
we all know subcontinent politics, how it goes. We all know the subcontinent politics.
I will slightly rephrase it. I think it's about labeling the advice. For example, in case of Pakistan, now, when we are talking of smog and when we are talking against those subtle burnings of the rice crop, we are linking it with the respiratory diseases and with COVID. So the message that is going from the Punjab government that in the areas where rice settle burning is a common practice are more
stubble burning.
And more prone to COVID, and that's why they need to stop it. So perhaps politicians, they need to be educated. Kia is saying that society needs to be educated. I'll just focus on that bunch which rules the society and which are politicians. Those need to be educated, and those need to be educated in a slightly different manner so that they can start linking the climate change with the pandemic. And when they are allocating money for pandemic, that actually goes for a green and clean climate.
Now, Abid Saab, are they open to be educated? That's the big question. People like you can try to get them educated, but aren't they open to be educated?
They need to be in the headlines of the newspapers and media.
We need to carry that forward. We need to carry it forward.
And that's
absolutely. I think that's a great answer.
Their role comes in.
Okay. What about Shamrat? What's your take on that? You're seeing Indian politicians for a long time. Do you really feel that they are going to change?
I completely agree with Mr. Abid here. If we can address our climate agenda under the banner of immediate local agenda which will affect the constituency where the politician getting elected,
absolutely,
then it will then become a political agenda.
Absolutely.
Till now, environment hasn't got that level of hierarchy in their political agenda because it is not the local agenda. It's so-called, it is not affecting us. But when it will address their local health issue, their livelihood issue, like this stubble burning, there is one good initiative in the IOCL. They are using this stubble for putting a hydrogen CNG. They are making hydrogen and push it into the CNG to reduce the emission of the CNG we use for our public transport. So that will give a economic value of the stubble. So then the particular farmer will be happy to sell that stubble without burning.
Okay.
So that will address its livelihood.
No, the bottom line, as you said, is that it has to be part of the local agenda.
It has to be part of the local
but we have seen in India, in Delhi, air pollution is such a big issue. In Kolkata is such a big issue. But how did they make an impact when election comes? When election are not fought on air pollution, elections are not fought on the Sundarbans, people don't vote on the climate change, or they are not made to vote on that. So still there are gaps, there are areas which need to be plugged on.
Yeah, that's true. Because our day-to-day means the earning issue or livelihood issue is far bigger.
Roti kapda or makan still dominates the politics in subcontinent at least. Manjeet, what's your take on that? You're the final say. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so at least in the region, what I can see is the kind of democratic practice we have, where the certain political party or the figure comes for a certain year, they always look for the short-term gain, a tax revenue to be changed so that a lot of revenue can be made during their term in the government, so that that justifies the success of that government. But has in almost all the cases, but has never been a case that any of the politicians or the government has look for the long-term gain. So I think this is the time, looking at way we have seen around the world, the youth to be mobilized, and in terms of, because it's not only about the other lot of other issues that we have been discussing. It's also about the future generation that we have seen, and I fully agree in terms of the education to be done, linking it with the local issue, linking it with the air pollution, linking it with the cost of inaction in terms of climate change, the cost that will be raised in future if we don't act now. So I think those kind of messages has to be absolutely come forward.
So I think with that hopeful note that I think though there are ifs and buts, but as Kia very strongly said, and I think all kind of agreed to that point, is the world is changing. World is definitely changing, and also the COVID has perhaps contributed to the change, and the politicians hopefully will understand that change. They have to understand that the politics, the way they did their politics pre-COVID, maybe in the early 2000s, is not going to happen now. And then it comes to US, and as being pointed out by Kia, that still the Senate issue is there. So we really don't know how far Biden will get power, executive power, to do what he wants to do or what he committed to do. He committed to do a lot, but Senate will allow him to do that? That's a big question. Also, another question that I think being made is that what he'll be doing domestically. That's a very important, because US is one of the biggest emitters. So not only funding internationally will make sense, it has to be done domestically. And also the US's track record on funding is not all that great, even before Trump. So post-Trump, Biden coming into the power, how it is going to influence, and South Asian countries, here we have Nepal, we have Pakistan, we have India, Bangladesh, Maldives, and all the countries around. They are some of the biggest, having the biggest impact of climate change in the world. So they are really eagerly looking forward how Biden era unfolds, especially in the finance. And I personally feel, having covering the almost 10 COPs now, that unless public finance comes, maybe in a smaller scale, but that has to come, and that can only trigger the private finance. Only private finance, only market is not going to do the change. So the public finance has to give that direction. So I hope that it's a great discussion. I am really thankful to all of you for your time. I had a great evening, and Kia is a great morning, I believe. And I hope that we'll take forward this discussion in this South Asian Environment Dialogue being organized, hosted by the Climate Channel with the Plurals. And definitely again in future, we'll sit together, we'll discuss another issue. This week, from Sunday, this Sunday onwards, the next 5 or 6 weeks, we'll be discussing the outstanding COP agendas, because this is the COP time. Normally, all of you are supposed to be in COP, but this year being pandemic, we are stuck up in our homes. So let's turn our homes into a COP discussion platform. That's what I've decided to do. So from this week onwards, the 4 or 5 weeks down the line, we'll be discussing each of the outstanding agendas of COP. And this is the first of that edition. I hope you have liked it. And thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank
you very much.
It was a great discussion. Yeah.